There's a line that has been making the rounds online ever since Nancy Grace stepped into the conversation surrounding Nolan Wells' death, and it practically explains the entire reaction by itself. Across social media, people have been repeating some version of the same sentiment. Now that Nancy Grace is paying attention, somebody is finally going to be held accountable. The mood has been less like a TV host covered a case and more like backup just arrived. That response is the real headline. More than anything Nancy Grace has actually said, the public reaction to her presence says something important about how stories like this move in the current media era. It reveals how much faith people place in visibility, in celebrity attention, and in the idea that once the spotlight gets bright enough, justice will be forced to follow. What matters here is not simply that Nancy Grace talked about the case, but what her involvement can actually do behind the scenes of public pressure. There is a real mechanism at work when someone with her profile steps in. It can push a case back into the national conversation, raise the temperature around official silence, and make it harder for institutions to coast while people are watching. At the same time, that kind of attention comes with consequences, and both the promise and the risk deserve to be taken seriously. For many people, especially within the Black community, her appearance has been read as a sign that long-awaited scrutiny may finally be arriving. That feeling is understandable, but it is also worth being honest about the complications that come with turning a tragedy into a nationally amplified media event.
It's my understanding, Dave Mack, that sound we just played is real sound. That is not doctored sound, but someone else claims that's them saying, "Give me my phone back."
This is not about tearing Nancy Grace down, and it is not about applauding her uncritically either. It is about looking squarely at what happens when a case receives this level of high-voltage attention. Shortly after Nolan Wells was laid to rest in Mississippi, Grace dedicated an entire episode of crime stories to his death, revisiting the known details and sharply questioning the way local authorities have handled the matter. To understand why that landed so strongly, it helps to remember who Nancy Grace is in the first place. She is not just another familiar face on television. Her name carries a long history in crime coverage, and that history is exactly why her involvement feels significant to supporters and unsettling to skeptics at the same time.
Well, Nancy, what we have is some friends that were also out on the boat trip out to Horn Island.
Grace built her public image as a former prosecutor turned television powerhouse, known for her fiery delivery and her refusal to soften criticism when she believes something is off. To supporters, that reputation makes her a relentless advocate, someone who drags ignored cases into the spotlight and keeps pressure on institutions that might otherwise drift. To critics, that same intensity has at times meant dramatic conclusions delivered before the full picture was in place. Both readings matter here, because both are part of what she brings into a case like this. The very force that makes her effective at commanding attention is also what makes some people uneasy when the facts remain unsettled and no one has been charged. You do not have to either canonize her or dismiss her to see that clearly. In her coverage, Grace focused heavily on two issues. One was the conflicting accounts about Nolan's final hours. The other was the confusion surrounding his phone. On the first point, she was characteristically blunt, pointing out that the different versions of events cannot all be true at the same time. That observation hit hard because it stripped the situation down to a simple and emotionally explosive conclusion. If the stories clash, then somebody is not telling the truth. She also zeroed in on the phone data, raising concerns about reported location discrepancies and questioning how a gap of that size could be brushed aside. Her argument was not simply that technology can be imperfect, but that a mismatch that dramatic should invite serious forensic scrutiny rather than a casual explanation. Even if there are ordinary technical reasons for conflicting data, her instinct that the issue deserves a real answer is not unreasonable.
Going celebration, the funeral will be held at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs. It is going to be, visitation will be 9 to 11, and then the funeral will start after that.
That concern about the phone is one of the more concrete issues she highlighted. Nolan's mother has said publicly that when she reviewed his accounts, she noticed missing content from the day he vanished. She has also said that different tracking tools appeared to place the phone in locations that did not line up with each other or with where it was eventually recovered. Grace treated that inconsistency the way a prosecutor might, as the kind of detail that cannot simply be shrugged away. To be fair, location data can be messy. Different apps use different systems, and inaccuracies are not rare. But the broader point remains. When the gap sounds that large, people naturally want more than vague reassurance. Notably, the phone examination is already an area investigators and the family have agreed should be pursued. So Grace has focused their points directly at one of the case's most serious unresolved questions. Still, it is important to note that she did not reveal some explosive new piece of evidence. She was not unveiling a secret file or breaking open a hidden lead. She was taking facts already in the public sphere and reacting to them with force, urgency, and a voice big enough to make the whole country listen. That is where her true influence lies. What Nancy Grace brings first is a platform, and in cases like this, that matters enormously. A grieving family in Mississippi, even one represented by a high-profile attorney, is still fighting for space in an overcrowded media landscape. Attention is precious, especially when public pressure may shape how seriously a case is pursued. Grace has spent decades building a national audience, and when she gives a full hour to a story, that story becomes much harder to quietly fade from view. That kind of sustained visibility can function as accountability. Public officials do not respond the same way when they know people are watching closely and refusing to let a story disappear. For a family frightened that the case might slowly lose urgency once headlines cool off, that kind of attention is not superficial. It can be deeply meaningful. She also brings a specific kind of credibility. Because she is a former prosecutor, her questions carry a different weight than those of an average commentator. When she points out contradictions or challenges the handling of digital evidence, she is not just expressing outrage. She is modeling the kind of adversarial questioning viewers associate with courtroom logic, and that can increase public pressure on authorities to prove they are asking those same hard questions themselves. There is also a symbolic dimension that should not be underestimated, especially for the Black community that has rallied around this case. The reaction to Grace has not just been about added exposure. It has felt, for many, like a powerful ally has entered the fight. That feeling exists within a very real history, one in which suspicious deaths involving young Black people have too often been dismissed, minimized, or resolved with an urgency that did not match the gravity of the loss. Grace is also only one part of a much larger circle of high-profile support around the case. Ben Crump is representing the family. Al Sharpton has spoken out and offered support. Tyler Perry has reportedly assisted with funeral costs. Colin Kaepernick's organization helped fund the independent autopsy. Byron Allen has also been named among those backing the family. When that many nationally known figures gather around one case, it sends a message that this family is not being left to stand alone. But that kind of convergence does more than add support. It turns the case into a national cause, and national causes develop their own momentum. They create pressure not only for accountability, but for a dramatic ending that feels emotionally satisfying. Sometimes that momentum aligns with the evidence. Sometimes it races ahead of it. That is where the darker side of the celebrity attention machine comes in. And this case has already shown exactly how ugly they can get. The same spotlight that keeps officials on notice can also intensify harassment, rumor, and chaos. This story has already produced online threats aimed at Nolan's friends, doxing and harassment directed at his grieving mother, waves of AI-generated misinformation, and false rumors so aggressive that another young woman's family had to publicly deny she was missing. Attention does not just illuminate, it can also inflame. That makes lines like, "somebody's lying," far more complicated than they first appear. As a matter of logic, it is a fair statement. Contradictory accounts do need to be resolved. But once words like that hit a massive audience already hungry for a villain, they can take on a life of their own. They become less a question and more a signal flare for internet detectives to start targeting whoever seems closest to the contradiction. And in this case, the people caught in that blast radius are not public institutions. They are young private individuals, including Nolan's teenage friends and a 19-year-old girl, none of whom have been charged with anything. At least one has already been swept into false rumors and online cruelty. In a courtroom, accusatory language is constrained by process. Online it is not. There are no guardrails once millions of emotional strangers decide they know who to blame. That asymmetry matters. When a public figure's suspicion helps keep a case active, the benefit is spread across the system. Officials feel pressure, the case stays visible, and transparency may improve. But when the resulting frenzy misfires, the damage falls on specific people immediately and personally. The upside is institutional. The downside is intimate. That should make everyone with a major platform extraordinarily careful. There is another danger too, and it is subtler. Once a case becomes part of the entertainment engine, complete with heroes, suspects, and dramatic turning points, the narrative can start outrunning the evidence. Grace's certainty makes for compelling television, but the case itself remains unresolved in critical ways. The autopsy has been described as undetermined. The cause of death has not been officially established. The contradictions remain unanswered because the proof needed to answer them has not yet fully emerged. When a confident broadcaster tells a huge audience that the official story smells wrong, that audience can harden into a conclusion long before the facts justify it. Sometimes that skepticism will later look justified. Sometimes it will not. But once people emotionally commit to a theory, they can become deeply resistant to any eventual outcome that feels less dramatic than what they were primed to expect. That is why both truths have to be held at once. Nancy Grace's involvement can absolutely help by keeping a legitimate case in public view, pressuring officials to be transparent, and making sure a grieving family is not ignored. It can also absolutely do harm by intensifying mob behavior that has already hurt innocent people and by encouraging certainty before the evidence is ready to support it. What is most revealing about the public response is the belief underneath it. When people say that now somebody will finally go to jail, they are expressing a broader and deeply understandable idea, that justice in America often seems tied to attention, that if a case gets enough coverage, enough celebrity backing, enough public heat, the outcome shifts. There is truth in that belief, and that is exactly what makes it so unsettling. Attention really does affect outcomes. Cases with powerful advocates often do receive a different level of urgency than cases without them. But if we accept that too completely, we end up placing justice in the hands of visibility rather than evidence. We end up acting as though the loudest tragedies deserve resolution most. The Nolan Wells case may well benefit from Nancy Grace's spotlight, but so many other families whose cases never go viral deserve the same seriousness, the same urgency, and the same commitment to truth. The fact that celebrity attention can feel essential is not just a commentary on this case. It is an indictment of the system that makes such attention feel necessary in the first place. That is why celebrating Grace's arrival and feeling disturbed by what that celebration says about the system are not contradictory reactions. They belong together. A desperate family would be entirely rational to welcome more cameras, more pressure, and more influential voices if those things improve the odds of answers. The flaw is not in that choice. The flaw is in a system where the volume of your advocates can seem nearly as important as the strength of your evidence. So what does Nancy Grace entering this story really mean? It does not mean the case is solved. It does not mean an arrest is around the corner. And it definitely does not mean guilt has been established by television rhetoric. She has no legal authority to indict, arrest, or convict anyone. What she has is influence, and influence can be used responsibly or recklessly. At its best, that influence keeps a serious case from slipping out of sight. It pressures officials to show their work, to answer legitimate questions, and to treat public concern with the seriousness it deserves. At its worst, it fuels premature certainty and directs an angry national audience toward private individuals who have not been charged with any crime. The questions Nancy Grace raised about conflicting accounts and phone data are fair questions. The real test is whether those questions remain questions or whether the public turns them into ready-made verdicts. That is the line that matters. A giant platform can force attention, but it cannot manufacture justice. Only evidence can do that. The most valuable outcome her spotlight can produce is a stronger push for the evidence to come forward clearly and publicly, whether that means the autopsy findings, the phone analysis, or the conclusions of a grand jury. The least valuable outcome would be an audience convincing itself it already knows the answer simply because a forceful television personality made the uncertainty feel like proof. That gap between hope and reality is the part that keeps lingering. Many people hope Grace's involvement means someone will end up behind bars. What it actually guarantees is more scrutiny for a case that plainly deserves it, and more pressure on officials in Mississippi to be transparent about how they are handling it. Those are not the same thing. One is a fantasy of celebrity-delivered justice. The other is the real, imperfect, but meaningful work of public scrutiny. In the end, this moment forces a bigger question into the open. What does it say about all of us that a family's odds of getting answers may genuinely improve when a television star decides to care? It is natural to feel grateful that the spotlight found Nolan Wells. But it is just as necessary to feel uneasy that the same spotlight has already scorched innocent people in the process. Both feelings deserve to stay in the room. The honest response to Nancy Grace's arrival is neither a full-throated cheer nor a cynical shrug. It is a disciplined kind of hope, one that wants pressure on institutions, demands evidence, and refuses to let public spectacle decide the truth ahead of time. That posture is less catchy than a viral slogan, and far less emotionally satisfying than declaring that justice is now inevitable. But it is the only stance that truly serves an 18-year-old whose death deserves real answers. Nancy Grace may help keep the door from closing. Only the evidence will tell anyone what is actually on the other side.